Are we in? Hey, how about that? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's Bill Whittle live for March 2nd. That'll be Thursday. We're a little bit late off the blocks today because we have some absolute awesomeness. We got all kinds of video segments for you today. So today we're going to be talking about some disturbing news. Apparently, the Islamic Republic of Iran has defeated the United States Navy, and we have the footage to prove it. So that's a bit of a shock, certainly. And then after that, we'll be talking about Don Lemon, CNN commentator, whose comments yesterday can only be construed in one possible way, and that is that he's a miserable, hate-filled racist. So we're a little late off the blocks. Let's get this baby going. Push the button, Neil, and we're ready for Bill Whittle Live. Here we go. Hey. Oh, look at this. Here it comes. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Bill Whittle live, and we, as I say, we have some bad news, as you can see here in the screenshot behind me here. The Islamic Republic of Iran has defeated the United States of America in the World Cup Finals, and no, actually, they've the Republic of Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, who am I kidding? I want to give them their due credit, has soundly defeated not only the United States Navy, but the United States Air Force as well. And of course, we have the video footage to prove it. We wouldn't leave you just hanging out there on a story like that unless we could, back up those kind of words with some pretty serious actions. So I think what we'll do, and I hope you're all sitting down, because this is going to be, it's going to be painful for us to watch as Americans and American patriots. Let's just go ahead and look at some of this horrific footage that's just coming out of the Persian Gulf now. Do we have Iran CG loaded? All right, here it comes. I'll do a quick narration of it as we go along. So I know you want to have that kind of a military aspect and sort of a commentary on that. So let's have a look at this disturbing footage of the U.S. forces. You can see they're coming in to block up helicopters here. Here, the American Special Forces are landing here in Iran. You can tell it's Iran because it looks like living hell. Hey, you guys need to be a little bit closer together because one hand grenade would kill all of you. It's an Iranian tank. It's a advanced Iranian technology out there standing alone on the battlefield. I think they really showed us something with DMT. I really do. I just had no idea that hold on, there's more. He knocked his coffee over. Holy cow, wait, hold on. He's fired a weapon of some kind. Looks like a small caliber gun off of a destroyer. Yep, there's his coffee falling to the ground. You guys have to be more careful about that because I'm going to show you. Here goes the show for you. Oh my god, they sunk our battleship. They sunk our battleship. We don't have any battleships anymore. That's how good that weapon
قربان سه ناو محافظ دشمن منهدم شد.
به واحد موشکی بگو مرحله دوم عملیات.
Ballistic missiles. Now, of course, these were provided to the Iranian by the Obama administration and probably were paid for a giant pallet of cash that we gave them. Okay, you can see the Iranian muscle right now, and this
اینجا مرکز کنترل گزارش میده. موشک‌ها در حال خروج از جو هستن. انشاءالله تا 5 دقیقه دیگه به هدف‌ها میرسن.
is obviously the more powerful it is. Hang on a second. Here come the American jets, and I think this is an Iranian helicopter. Saeed, you're a little low on the deck there. A little probably close to me. Here come the Iranian forces. You can tell because they're flying American-made F-14s, which we gave them in 1979. And apparently, it's just a bloodbath for America. What do we see here? He's put his visor down. He's serious now. Here come the Iranian pilots peeling off into the command center, and he's looking off. And there's an F-14. They're landing on the deck of the tank. He's still worried about his car. B-2s on fire, being shadowed by Iranian F-14s. Here come the F-14s for Iran. And they're flying over some kind of a strange... There's a command center being led by an F-14. Here comes a helicopter. Oh, more F-14s firing more missiles from our weapons. And here they go. He's going faster now. Look at that. Here comes the bombs, the explosions. There goes the B-2. He's looking down at the B-2. There's always the martyrdom option because you never know. In Islam, if you decide to ram a bomb, you go right through that green door that's filled with kryptonite into the Islam. And yes, that's, I think, the first one. Because it just loops and cycles. I hope you were as not as disturbed about this as I was, because frankly it was it's pretty hard to watch. Now you think I'm just being snarky, and I am, but I'm being snarky for a reason, and I'm going to make a point about this. But I'll make a point about all this in just a moment. So if you're not already so I'm starting to sound like Barack Obama without the teleprompter, which is part 2 of our story today. If you're not already too upset by this catastrophe that we've just seen, you can say, oh, well, that was only computer graphics, Bill. It was only computer graphics. It's just computer graphics, and it doesn't mean a thing. Well, my friends, I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you, because we've got something that's not computer graphics. It's actual live footage of the Iranian Navy defeating a United States aircraft carrier. Do we have Iran carrier there? Okay, now, guys, I want you to hang on, because this is not going to be easy to watch. But again, I'll do my very best to narrate it for you. Anyway, loud music, moderate video. Did you guys not even hear any of it? Let's see. Anyway, here we go. I'm assuming you can hear me. We're gonna play it anyway. So here comes the aircraft carrier thing.
بینندگان عزیز، ما روی یکی از ناوهای هواپیمابر امریکایی هستیم. البته ماکتش در 9مین رزمایش پیامبر اعظم برای بچه‌های سپاه برنامه خاصی برای این ناو دارند. این ماکتی است که تقریبا هم اندازه شناور واقعی آن است. سپاهیان اسلام برای آن برنامه‌ها دارند. شلیک 12 فروند موشک از روی شناورهای تندرویی که 60 نات سرعت دارند. عملیاتی که کارشناسان نظامی آن را در جهان بی‌نظیر می‌دانند. 4 فروند موشک قدرتمند ساحل به دریا، هدفشان این ناو هواپیمابر فرضی است.
با عملیاتی شدن این موشک‌ها حالا دیگر کشتی‌های پهن پیکر هم
آن را به موشکی نقطه زن و هوشمند مجهز کردند و آمده است تا قدرت شلیک، هدفگیری و نقطه زنی خود را نمایش دهد.
انبوهی از شناورها صحنه رزمایش را آکنده از اراده و غیرت مدافعان این مرزبون می‌کنند.
ما هرگز در سطح توانمندی‌های موجود متوقف نمی‌شیم.
400 راکت به سمت شناور شلیک می‌شود.
یگان ویژگی عملیات سپاه یا همان تفنگداران دریایی ایران اسلامی عملیات تصرف.
Look at that. That's USN 404. So that means that we built another.
چیزی در خلیج فارس تنها گوشه‌ای از اقتدار مثال زدنی سپاه پاسداران انقلاب اسلامی در دفاع از استراتژیک‌ترین تنگه جهانه.
استراتژیک را ندارد و عملاً دشمن در دریا زمینگیر می‌شود.
شناور جنگی و تاکتیکی سپاه را به چشم دید و آرام شد. رژه‌ای که تنها قسمتی از توان دفاعی سپاه است.
9مین رزمایش دریایی پیامبر اعظم برای دوستان و دشمنان پیامی دارد.
هدف یا هدف‌های مشابه انجام خواهیم داد ان شاءالله که به برکت خداوند متعال رزمندگان اسلام در توانمندی خودشون موفق هستند و موفق خواهند بود.
Vessels sent our way. That's it. Neil, thanks. We'll go back. Now, apparently the sound on that was too loud, and what we get for having tried to do something too annoying. So in any event, probably didn't turn out the way I wanted it to in terms of the volume, but you know what? Here we are all by ourselves. Here's the point. Can you? They said they can't hear you. Please do it over. I can't take the sound off of these. I'm not gonna put you through that. Here's basically what we're doing. I think the sound may have just swamped everything out. We don't have much of a board here. We just kind of output them and run them. You saw the pictures, so anyway, there you go. it's somebody said show a quick clip and then explain. It's not the explaining that's funny. It's the narration that was hilarious. Sorry that you guys couldn't have heard that a little more cleanly. You know, it looks like I'm just joking and snarking around about all this. But I am going to make a serious point here, and that's simply this. This is dangerous, this joking, hilarious stuff. It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. As a matter of fact, it's dangerous to, hey, look, somebody calling on my phone. It's dangerous to Iran, and it's dangerous to Americans, and I'll tell you why. It's possible that some people believe this thing, and that's not good. It's not good for a lot of reasons. Once again, after talking about Athens and Sparta all day yesterday, I want to mention something else that Dr. Victor Davis Hanson mentioned in his incredible book, Carnage and Culture. Here's basically what he said. He said, if you look out through all of history going back to the Greeks versus the Persians, the West versus the Persians, imagine, 2,500 years ago, same situations going on. And what Dr. Hanson said was this. He said that whenever the West is fighting against non-Western countries, you see the same kind of patterns. And that is that the non-Western countries, like Iran or Persia back in 2600 BC, somewhere in there, are using Western weapons, Western soldiers, Western strategies, Western technology, Western techniques, and all of it in order to try and defeat the West. And I thought that's why I wanted to do this story. I'm sorry the sound came out so badly, but that's basically what I wanted to talk about here. You notice that in these fantasy videos of theirs, that the Iranians are, first of all, they're dressed like Americans. On their on all of their ships, they're wearing a kind of navy digital kind of blue camouflage. You'll see that all of their weapons are fighter jets that were manufactured in the United States. They've got a few F-14s. I don't know if any of them are still flying. The fact is they are trying to scare Americans, because that's what they're trying to do. The state says they weren't behind the CG-1, but they were certainly behind the Bamboo carrier. And basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to show us that Iran is capable of fighting America because Iran has Western weapons. They've got F-14 Tomcats. You could see it. The F-14 Tomcats were a legacy of what we left them just before the Shah took over in Iran, before the Shah was deposed from Iran and Ayatollah Khomeini took over in the Iranian Revolution. I don't think any of them are still flying. I don't think they have the parts for them anymore. So those are grounded, but they're using those anyway. They're using drones, robotic drones, which I'm not sure they have. I'm pretty sure they don't. But in any event, they've got those things all deployed. They've got everything that the West has. They've got nuclear ballistic missiles coming out of underground silos, and they've got an endless supply of these kind of movies, by the way. It's not just this one. And basically what they're trying to do is they're not only trying to gin up their own people and get their own people, motivated for this coming fight, but they're also trying to scare us away. And this is a fundamental difference between Western and Islamic countries. Islamic countries are just culturally use boast and big language as a means of intimidating their enemies. And apparently it works for them. So when they say, should you fire one bullet upon the sacred soil of Iran, we will rain volcanoes of hot lead on your heads, and they say stuff like this, and I think they think it's supposed to frighten us. It doesn't frighten us. What frightens me is that they may actually believe this, or their people may believe it, or I suspect some of the generals probably believe it. So what does it say about Iran's actual military capabilities, or its national budget for that matter, when in order to show that it can defeat the United States Navy, it builds a 1/10 scale, roughly aircraft carrier shaped wooden balsa boat with 404 on the bow, and then they throw a couple of Estes rockets at it, and there's a couple of explosions, and the next thing you know, hurrah for us, we've beaten America. We sunk their carriers. It is such a desperate ploy It's such a desperate ploy. You know, I'll tell you who's been doing this too, and not so much that he has to lately, but this has been Vladimir Putin's VO, or MO rather, since he basically came back to power. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was so weak militarily. None of their stuff worked. Their entire navy was just rusting away in Vladivostok and in other places, and in order to try to deter us, they were acting very aggressive. They were acting aggressively. They went into Georgia, went into Ukraine, and you would think, well, why would they do that? And the reason they're doing that is because they understand the psychological value of looking and sounding intimidating, especially when you're not. It doesn't work on professionals, obviously, because professionals in the U.S. military know exactly what Russia's capabilities are, and Iran's, for that matter, and pretty much everybody else's. But it works for their people, and it gins up some support and some patriotism, which is not always a bad thing. And it works against idiots here in America as well. There was a really profoundly interesting moment in the debates. I think it was the second debate. It might have been the third debate. Hillary Clinton said that Donald Trump had made a comment that these Iranians, the soldiers, and rather the sailors who had kidnapped our American sailors, and the Iranian Navy was basically insulting us and just thumbing their nose at us and basically just taunting us. And Trump apparently said, well, you know, if I'm president, they're not going to do that anymore. We're going to hit them. And Hillary Clinton basically said, how can we possibly have a man like this as Commander-in-Chief of the United States? The idea that we would go to war, we might find ourselves at war with Iran because some sailors were taunting us. My God, how can we possibly allow a man like this to have this finger on the trigger? And I listened to that woman speak, and I thought, man, Hillary, you have been wrong about a lot of things in the past, but this is, in fact, you're the acme of how incorrect you are. Donald Trump is 100% correct. This is how wars start, and it's especially how wars start against democracies, and it's especially how wars start against democracies named the United States of America. You have a bunch of savages out there, because that's what they are, and they murder women, and they murder homosexuals, they murder anybody they don't like. They kind of find a couple holding hands, they'll beat them to death, or if some woman is raped by her uncle, they throw acid in the girl's face and not the uncle's, and so on. So they're just savages. And these savages look at what we've got here. We have an actual civilization here in America. And they look at our civilization and they go, boy, that's kind of nice. And they think that they can have our civilization and they can take everything that we've worked so hard for and built because we're so decadent and we're so stupid. Because we have movie stars, and forget movie stars, because we have presidential candidates saying, we don't want to go to war with Iran. We don't want to make them angry. My God, you know, if they're taunting us, well, then just for God's sakes, let's let them keep taunting us. And if they're taking over our boats, then for God's sakes, let's let them do it. For God's sakes, anything except for a war with Iran. And you know, you get 8 years of this coming out of the Obama administration, and pretty soon, the Iranians start to think, you know what, maybe they are that weak. Maybe they are that weak and that stupid. It's possible. And so they taunt us some more, and they push some more, and then we don't do anything, and then they push some more, and then we don't do anything, till finally they push so hard that now we have to do something, and now we're in a war which we never would have been in if during the entire time we had been playing like we're strong. And when I heard Hillary Clinton say that, I could tell that Hillary Clinton and all of the Democrats are terrified of the idea of going to war with Iran. And no one out there is thinking that it should be Iran that should be terrified about going to war with the United States. That's the entire point here. That's the entire point about these CG things, and that's why I brought him in and did that kind of, like I said, I guess the audio was really mangled, but it's kind of a running, snarky commentary about how silly all of this is, because they're starting to believe it. The people have been led to believe it. The leadership's being led to believe it. And if you don't believe me, you can go to North Korea, which is another lovely place out there where they think they can beat the United States too. And you think, we all look at this and we go, this is some kind of a bad joke, right? We look at this Iranian, simulations, and we just go, it's a parody, right? It's a joke. Bill put the CG together just to get some laughs. No, it's not a joke for them. They believe it. most North Koreans believe that they could defeat the United States because their information, much like that in America, is controlled by a political party, and they're only fed information that the political party in power wants them to see. So how would they know what American capabilities are? They've been told for 30, 40 years now that Iran is of military parity with the United States, and that by sending out a couple of those Boston whalers, they can sink a U.S. aircraft carrier, and they think that that by giving them the idea that we're wearing, that Iranians have got like a bolt-action rifle on top of a tank. They're technologically as advanced or more advanced than we are, and they do things like show pictures of a commander. It's just hilarious to me, actually. It's a little thing, but it's hilarious. Somebody goes to push the fire button on that destroyer and knocks his coffee over. It's like his coffee was in the way of the fire button. You might want a little more naval discipline there, guys. I'm pretty sure that's not a problem we have on American warships, is knocking over coffee, when we hit the red button that says fire. So then this little shell from this little destroyer goes sailing, I don't know, half a continent away. And this one shell from this one Iranian destroyer strikes the USS Iowa, which hasn't been in service since the first Gulf War. This giant battleship that we retired, 20 years ago or more. Hits this one destroyer shell, hits this American battleship amidships, and the whole thing just blows right out of the water. Now, I know what a destroyer shell is, and I know what a destroyer turret is, and I know what the Iowa class battleships were capable of, and if there were any of them left in the U.S. Navy, throwing those destroyer shells against the side of the Iowa would be like, you might as well just be using spitballs. And I know that the B-2 bombers don't fly in at 300 or 400 feet above the deck, and I know that the Iranians don't have fleets of F-14s that are capable of defeating all of our airplanes, and I know they don't have ballistic missiles out in the desert, but I am very worried that the people of Iran may think that, and that the leaders of Iran, after enough time, may be starting to believe their own press reports. It's fairly evident that after the Iraq invasion in 2003, it's pretty clear that Saddam himself actually believed Baghdad Bob. No, the Americans are out on the border and they're taking horrible casualties. The Iraqi army, Saddam, were just slaughtering them en masse. They've just been stopped at the border. They're begging for peace. Meanwhile, we've got M1 Abrams columns going right through the center of downtown Baghdad. So this is the point I'm trying to make here. This is why it's dangerous. You can look at this and laugh, and we can look at it and laugh because we live in a free society, and that's the point I want to get back to in a minute. We can look at it and laugh because we live in a free society and we know what works and we don't. We know what doesn't work. Steve Green and I were in CPAC, and we did a members only segment where Steve and I we just turned on the camera because we were just riffing about the F-35, and we were talking about Phoenix missiles and Patriot missiles. And the Phoenix missile was supposed to be able to shoot down aircraft 300 miles away, fleet defense for U.S. naval forces. As it turns out, the Phoenixes, I don't think they ever hit anything. And the Patriot missiles, which we were told were shooting down these incoming Scuds, didn't have that kind of success record either. Is that being negative? Is that being unpatriotic? No, it's being realistic. It's understanding the limitations of our weapons systems. It's understanding what we can do and what we can't do. And furthermore, it's informing the American people of what we really can do and what we really can't do. So, when you see things like this, it's time to be afraid, and you realize it's time to be afraid, not afraid of it's time, it's an interesting kind of an irony. It's not time to be afraid about going to war with Iran. It's time to be afraid about what it looks like if we are determined to show that we don't want to go to war with Iran. I think if we were in a shooting war, look, it's always dangerous to underestimate the enemy, and I don't want to be accused of that. And certainly the big disasters in history come when you go, they're just going to be peanuts, we're going to knock them over. But I think if it really came down to a shooting war with Iran, it'd be over in 48 hours, and I don't think we'd take a single casualty if we decided not to. But that's not what, and the Iranians may be called to do this someday because their leadership's barking mad and insane. But the larger point that I wanted to make here before we move on to Don Lemon is just this. Victor Davis Hanson, in his amazing book called Carnage and Culture, talks about the fact that Western societies are by far, the most lethal killing machines in the world, that free people make the deadliest soldiers, even though that may not seem like it would make sense. Free people, especially volunteers, who go into the military to protect their country will fight like demons. And no one fights better than them. And it's not just a question of courage. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's different. Our definition of courage is different than what the Iranian definition of courage is. For example, among third world countries like Iran and other Islamic countries and African countries and the rest of them, they look at courage in battle as an individual warrior who goes out there and kills as many of the enemy as they possibly can. That's considered courage. Courage is the guy who's got, 5 scalps on his belt, and he goes out there and waves his shield and goes out there and kills some enemies. That's a courageous warrior. That's a warrior. Hansen was saying we don't really do warriors here in the West. We do soldiers, and there's a big difference between a warrior and a soldier, and the difference is that a warrior goes out for individual glory and individual prowess, and a soldier understands that real courage is staying in the line of battle, maintaining discipline, holding on to your post, manning your post, doing your job. And that's what courage is in the West. It's the ability to fight together as a unit. It started with the Greek phalanxes, and it continues to the present day when we have amphibious forces supported by marine aviation. The entire front line of the battlefield has been softened up by Navy forces. The Air Force comes in from overseas and puts some real heavy weight on some of those targets. And then the Army comes in with enough absolute mass to sit there and stay there and not go home. So this is what we do, and we do it very, very well. And we've been letting the world think that we don't know how to do this anymore, and that makes it dangerous for us. Makes it dangerous for Iranian citizens too, and I genuinely feel for them. I actually do, but they're not my problem, as President Trump might say. It's not President Trump's job to prevent Iranian casualties if we get into a shooting war with Iran. So as a guy who's a student of history and a student of messaging, I'm telling you that things like this have to be countered, because if we don't counter them now, they're going to believe their own propaganda, the same way that the Soviets believed their own propaganda at the beginning of World War II, in the same way that that all of these dictatorships with aggressive intentions come to believe they're capable of doing what they think they can do when they can't. It's all computer graphics. But the very largest point that Hansen made, and I think this is the one that is most interesting to me, is that he said that if you look at the traditional battles between the West, as personified from the Greeks, all the way up to the versus the Persians, all the way up to the Americans and the Israelis fighting the Iranians and so on, you find that, as I said a few moments ago, you find that it's the other, as he described it, it's the Persians, it's the Iranians that are trying to use Greek or American tactics and Greek or American weapons and even Greek or American uniforms. When you see in that animation those Iranian admirals just in between bouts of spilling their coffee, you see they're in modern U.S. Navy digital camouflage, because the Iranians think, and they're correct, that's what modern soldiers look like. This is a much bigger issue than it may seem at first, because Hansen makes a case that is so obvious that it just knocks the wind out of you. He listed 10 battles in Carnage and Culture, and he talked about all 10 of them. They were conflicts between the West versus non-Western forces. And he mentions things that are just, again, so obvious that you'd think they would be striking, but you actually need to hear it. He talks to two conflicts in particular. He talks about Hernan Cortez and his maybe 1,000 Spanish conquistadors conquering the Aztec empire of 4, 5, 6 million people. By the way, those of you who are interested in these kind of things, I think the Aztecs were probably the worst people that ever lived on the face of the earth. And when the Aztec empire was dedicating its new pyramid, which was designed for human sacrifice, they had 4 bowls, 4 priests. The priests were rotating in and out because they were sacrificing. Sit down now. The Aztecs, when they dedicated their new temple, were executing 18 people a minute. A minute. That's actually higher than the factory death rate at Auschwitz. 18 people a minute. The Aztecs sacrificed 80,000 captives in 4 days. They put him up on the top of the pyramid, ripped their heart out with an obsidian blade, cut it out, held it up, kicked the body down to the ground. Priests down there would take the skin off the human body and they'd wear it like a cape. So Hernan Cortez comes into Teotihuacan, the Aztec capital, and after a course of battles and arranging allies with other Indian troops, Cortez defeats the Aztecs. The Aztecs were using obsidian blades and wooden clubs. Cortez had Cordoban steel weapons and armor and artillery and all the rest. But this is the big point. He had all of those things because he was coming from a Western culture. The other example he used was the British making a stand against the Zulus at Rorke Drift, where something like 150 British soldiers with single-shot breech-loading Martini Henry rifles, lever-action rifles that shot a 45 or a 50 caliber bullet and kicked like a mule. These 160 British soldiers got off 20,000 rounds in 24 hours, and they stopped a Zulu attack of 7,000 or 8,000. And so, obviously, the Western weapons are better. Obviously, the Western discipline is better. Obviously, the Western technology is better. But the thing that was so obvious that never occurred to me was that it's so much better that while native armies might defeat the British like they had just a few hours earlier at Isan Lawana in the Zulu War or in various other ambushes and so on in Afghanistan and so on, while it's possible for native armies to defeat a Western army, and it's possible for native armies to use Western weapons. The American Indians had, Winchester rifles and things like that. They had horses, as a matter of fact, because they didn't have those before the Europeans came along. They can copy the weapons. They can copy all of this. But it was never, whether Rorke's Drift was going to be overrun or whether Cortez was going to succeed or fail in Central America, was sometimes up in the air. But Hansen says what wasn't up in the air was the idea that the Aztecs are going to get on boats and invade London. That was not in the cards, or invade Seville, rather. And the Zulus were not ever going to get on boats and come and invade London. That's the level of difference between a Western civilization and a non-Western civilization. They can use our weapons, they can use our tactics, they can use our strategies, they can mimic our uniforms, they can do all of that stuff. But they are not Western armies, and they can't be, because their culture is so different. And their culture can steal the weapons, but the culture cannot deploy the weapons. The late lamented Stephen Dembest at USS Clueless talked about the fact that in the Iraqi army, if you wanted an artillery strike, it had to be called in by a general and had to go upstairs and be approved by Saddam, by which point he either approves it or denies it, comes down, and the target's not there anymore. Steve Dembest said a sergeant in the U.S. Army can call in an airstrike. That's the difference between the two. You don't just get the weapons, Iran. The weapons don't just come out of nowhere. We get the weapons and the skill and the dedication and the practice and the training and the money, because that's what wins and loses wars. They come from a free society. They come from people who are able to criticize their own defeats. They come from a military whose tradition is about analyzing not only our victories but our defeats. What went wrong? What did we do wrong? What can we do to fix it in the future? How did this horrible mistake happen? Who's responsible for it? What can we do to correct it? We have free people who are working for individual profit. That's why I'm doing 3 live shows of 4. I did 4 live shows yesterday. I'm doing it for my individual benefit. I'm doing it to save the country. That's absolutely true. And that's my primary motivation, because if I wanted to be richer, I'm sure I'd be in advertising. But the fact is, we're all here working in our self-interest because we want things. We want a nice house, and we want our families to be happy. We want college educations, want to tour the world, and so on. When you have an army of slaves, as Xerxes did, and you can whip them all you want to, but you cannot whip courage into slaves. And you cannot whip courage into people who you treat as slaves. And free people will beat you every time. And not just because we're richer and we can have better weapons, better technology, and all the rest. We'll beat you every time because we're free. And we fight harder than you do. And we fight longer than you do. And the kind of reverses that would have ruined any other nation when applied to the British defeat in San Luana, the Greek defeat in Athens, after the plague, after the Peloponnesian War, Western societies take that kind of catastrophe, and within a year or two, they're back. They're back. They don't give up. War is not a ceremonial thing for us. War is not a dance. Again, we're so used to living in this Western world. That's why I love doing this show and talking to people about these things. We assume that people in the third world look at war the same way we do. They don't. The innovation of the Western way of war is the idea that, okay, if we don't want to go to war, but if we're going to, then we are going to put all of the force and all the power we have in the field, and we're going to meet their enemy in the field, their army in the field, and we're going to destroy them utterly. And when they're destroyed, then they will have to surrender because they have no means of resisting, and from that point, then the threat is over with. Non-Western armies never thought that way. Most of these wars throughout history, up until the Greeks started to figure out how to do this, were ceremonial. You'd put 20 warriors from your side out there and 20 warriors from their side out there, and they dance around, and they do the kind of the haka thing, which is awesome, by the way, and they try to intimidate each other, and they throw sticks or they throw whatever back and forth, and then finally you would find that that whichever side was declared the winner would win. The Aztec warriors who Cortez defeated had something called flower warfare, where they just went out and ceremoniously went out there and tried to defeat people and so on. It's not a game. The point of all of this joking around, which was hilarious, I'm sorry I didn't get to hear it, on these Iranian CG things and blowing up our plywood carriers, is the entire point is it's not funny. It looks funny, but it's not funny. And when we have a guy finally like James Mattis in charge of the Department of Defense, the next time that there's a provocation from the Iranians, and there will be a next time, I suspect, and I certainly hope, that Mattis will hit them so hard that they will think about whether or not they want to try this again. One of the great stories of the Civil War, one of the greatest stories in history, had to do with Ulysses S. Grant, who was a simple man and not a great president, but a simple man, but an extraordinary general, an extraordinary tactician. His Vicksburg campaign strategy, just the way he pulled it off, is one of the greatest military operations in history. And Grant was not brilliant in the way that Robert E. Lee was brilliant and in the way that Stonewall Jackson was brilliant. Grant was very plodding and very methodical. If you got right down to it, and Grant drank too. Grant drank rather quite a lot. But Grant was never drunk on duty. And there are two stories about U.S. Grant that I find so interesting. The first one is just because I like it. He was succeeding. Grant was doing very well in the Western Theater against the Confederacy. So Lincoln brought him back east to take over command of both armies, and he stayed with the Army of the Potomac in the Eastern Theater. He didn't actually directly command it. Meade got to command it after winning at Gettysburg, but Grant was the commander-in-chief. And Grant, first thing he does after coming from the West as a hero to the East, he takes over the Army of the Potomac. He fights the Battle of the Wilderness, where 6 months earlier, Joseph Hooker had maybe the worst defeat in the Army of the Potomac's history. He had one entire flank rolled up, and it was Chancellorsville, and Chancellorsville was Stonewall Jackson and Lee's masterpiece. So the Army of the Potomac got thrashed there. Now they've got yet another new general, and his name is Grant, and he's coming from the West. The Army of the Potomac's filled with cynics. They had 7 commanders. So Grant fights Lee for the first time in the exact same battlefield. It's called the Battle of the Wilderness. And instead of having one flank rolled up, he has 2 flanks rolled up. His army completely collapses. It's a bigger defeat than Chancellorsville. And the soldiers, after the battle, are marching back down the road, and the road leads to Washington, and they get to this fork in the road, and they're expecting to go back to Washington, as they have done 6 or 7 times before, to lick their wounds and come out with another new general who's going to get more of them killed. And they got to this fork in the road, and they realized that they were turning south. They weren't going north. They'd been thrashed. They'd been defeated worse than they'd ever been defeated before. But they decided, Grant decided, okay, so he won a victory. We're just going to keep going until we win. They were heading south. And when each one of these regiments in this long line of the army retreating, when each one of these regiments got to that fork in the road, the cheers that went up because they were headed south. Grant had one time when he broke down, he was in a battle, I think it was this same battle as Chancellorsville, I think. I'm sorry, Wilderness, I think. And after it was over, a couple of aides went to talk, to bring him some reports or something, and Grant was in his tent, and he was sobbing. He was sobbing his guts out. They said they've never seen somebody so unmanned. They didn't go in there, they could just hear him. They said, never heard anybody so upset, never heard a grown man making those kind of noises. He was sobbing so badly. But he wasn't sobbing when the battle was on, and he wasn't sobbing the next day when he went out there to pick up the battle. He went into his tent, he got it out of his system by himself, and then he went back and decided to win the war. And then the main story about Grant is, because I know we're running long, I don't care, is that Grant talked about the very first time he was ever in combat in the Civil War as a captain or something like that. And there were a bunch of Confederates on this hill. And Grant went up there to take the Confederates and knock them off the hill. So Grant was talking about going up this hill with his army, small little company really, and they're hauling their artillery pieces up there, and it took a while. And Grant said that the entire way up there, he was his heart was in his throat as they went higher and higher up onto this hill looking for the Confederates. He was so filled with fear and so filled with apprehension and nervousness that when he finally got to the top of the hill and he expected to start this fight with the Confederates, he got to the top of the hill and he found out the Confederates had gone. They'd left. And Grant said, it had never occurred to me that they might be as frightened of me as I was of them, but it's a lesson I never forgot. And he didn't forget it. He didn't forget it. It's time to make the Iranians afraid of going to war with the United States. It's time to make them afraid of it enough so that they don't even joke about it. Because this is how we stay at peace, is by convincing our enemies that it's not a good idea to come and mess with our bamboo, plywood aircraft carriers, because we're not going to send plywood aircraft carriers. We're going to send the real ones, and they're going to be in for a bit of a surprise. Okay, I know this went super long. Let's say goodbye to our Facebook friends here. We've got a great segment on CNN's Don Lemon, noted racist, and I can prove it. We got the media to prove it. And if you'd like to see all of the shows, we've got them on SoundCloud starting now. Our producer Neil's been doing more and more every day, and we're going to have all of these Bill Whittle Live shows on SoundCloud, also on iTunes. We'll put up a link for those later today. If you want to listen to the whole show on the way back in your car, you're certainly welcome to do that, and we'll see if we can cut down or do something about that audio on that first segment. Sorry about that. So, Facebook fans, time to say goodbye. We'll do maybe another 10 minutes with our members, but it is a really good segment, and we have audio-visual for that as well. So, Facebook fans, thank you. We'll see you for Friday tomorrow, and if you're a member watching at BillWhittle.com, stick around, and if you're watching after the fact, you get to see the whole thing anyway. So, push the button, Neil, and we will see our Facebook friends tomorrow. Okay.